And I hope we have once again reminded people that man is not free unless government is limited. There's a clear cause and effect here that is as neat and predictable as a law of physics. As government expands, liberty contracts.
From this day forward, it's going to be only America first. America first.
The Liberty Podcast is brought to you by Proven Arms and Outfitters, specializing in rifles, pistols, tactical gear, and more. Learn more at ProvenOutfitters.com.
Welcome back. Did you enjoy my resting Biden face? Pretty good impersonation. I've been working on it over the Independence Day break, don't you know? But we're back. It is the Liberty Podcast, folks, presented by Proven Arms and Outfitters. Go to provenarms.com to learn all about their tactical gear, rifles and pistols, and everything you need to be a Second Amendment defending American. And we're in greater need of that than ever, are we not, ladies and gentlemen? It is 12 July, 2024. Happy belated Independence Day. We should really celebrate our independence all the time, not by cooking burgers and dogs and setting off fireworks, but by standing in the breach against tyranny and against the left, the progressive left. And they are in a progressive mode, are they not? A couple of quickies off the top here today. I've been reading Deception by Rand Paul, the senator from Kentucky. It is his very deep dive into the massively corrupt operations led by Dr. Anthony Fauci in the lead up to and during the pandemic, which we will never forget. He describes how Fauci and his colleagues ruthlessly attacked the highly qualified scientists who disputed their preferred narrative, and how they engaged in a massive cover-up to prevent themselves from being held responsible for the unleashing of the Chinese bioweapon due to their gain-of-function research and work in the Wuhan virology lab in beautiful Wuhan, China. Got to read the book, Deception by Rand Paul. Came out late last year. You might have overlooked it during the Christmas season, but it's still very relevant and needs to be read, especially in light of the fact that Fauci has now released his own 480-page self-aggrandizement, which somebody paid him to write and publish, unbelievably. It would be like if Jeffrey Epstein was still alive, giving him a book deal to talk about his virtuous lifestyle and whatnot. Hey, some other quick hitters. I don't know if you saw this one or not. Kind of made me laugh, and then I realized it kind of made me nervous. Huma Abedin, former aide to Hillary Clinton. You might remember her. She was hooked up with then Congressman Anthony Weiner and became the lovely Huma Weiner. But that marriage broke up because he's a scumbag, and even she couldn't stand it, and even the Clintons couldn't keep her in that one too long. She's now engaged to be married to Alex Soros, the son of billionaire political scumbag George Soros. Now think about this. This isn't just a happy couple. By the way, she's 47 and he's 38, so hubba hubba. But think about this a little bit now. Huma is a longtime close ally of the Clintons and all of their corruption. Soros, his father, has easily funded almost all of the far left progressive activities in this country and all other places around the world. He has used his vast and ill-gotten wealth for many destructive projects and continues to do so to this day. It's Soros money, ladies and gentlemen, that through the election in 2020 that made possible all the shenanigans. And it's Soros money that's hard at work right now figuring out ways to divert your legitimate votes away from the ballot boxes on 5 November this fall. But anyway, watch this little union here. This is more than just a couple of youngsters falling in love. I think this has ramifications because they're pretty young and they have a lot of time to do a lot of damage after finally, God help us, George Soros and Bill and Hillary go to their eternal resting place, which will be very warm, very sauna-like, I predict. Just saying. Hey, we have to continue to be vigilant as our dear Patriot Steve Bannon is still in the early stages of his federal prison sentence. He has 112 days to go, ladies and gentlemen, from right now, after reporting to the federal penitentiary in Danbury, Connecticut on 1 July. So that was a little over a week ago. And those of you who watch his program on Real America's Voice, War Room, are seeing that show continues to perk along with many excellent guest hosts. And his daughter, Maureen, reports that Steve is staying the course. He's a fighter, and he's not going to wilt in that prison. You can be sure of that. He'll come out of it better than ever, as long as they don't, knock him off between now and then. We got to keep an eye on that big time. So Peter Navarro, who's been imprisoned also without cause for 4 months, will be departing prison. His is in Miami next week, if all goes as planned. And then I expect we'll see him back on the War Room, leading the cause toward November and making America greater again. All right, that covers our opening salvos. Now, we've been watching the Biden collapse. We saw his full-blown dementia during the little TV show that CNN did with Donald Trump at one podium and Jolton Joe at the other. We saw that nightmare. It was highly predictable. Only the media expressed surprise that it went so poorly for their side. But, I got to thinking after watching his NATO press conference on 11 July, which was just yesterday, after the interminable NATO conference in Washington that went on for like days. Then they finally did his first live press conference in 8 months. Now that streak is exceeded by only one other streak. He hasn't had a cabinet meeting in the White House in 10 months. That has to be unprecedented in the history of the modern presidency, even the ancient presidency. Even George Washington surely had a cabinet meeting more than once every 10 months. I can only imagine that is true. Anyway, what if this is the thought that came to me as I was watching this press conference last night, as Biden was referring to Vice President Trump and calling Zelensky Putin, which he did earlier in the day, and stumbling over many what should have been straightforward answers to straightforward questions. It occurred to me, maybe this isn't just bumbling dementia. Maybe what we're really seeing here is the sheer arrogance of Biden. We know it's baked into his wife's every fiber of her body by her conduct. We know the son Hunter, who has never hunted for anything worth having other than ill-gotten money from foreign adversaries and, of course, strippers. But what if Joe is just an extension of the sheer arrogance of these people who therefore really don't care about the American citizens, really don't care about the fate of our country because they have the power, and the power is what fuels them. The power is what drives them. Everything else is irrelevant to them. And, I thought that was a pretty good notion that came over me. And then this morning on 12 July, it has been affirmed by people who are a lot more articulate and insightful than I am, beginning with none other than Kimberly Strassel of the Wall Street Journal. The headline of her Friday op-ed, "The Biden problem is policy. He's indispensable at 81 because the rest of the party has moved too far left for voters." So it's not that he's this great leader that they want to keep in place because of him. They need him as a diversion from what their real end game is. And Kimberly nails this in her concluding paragraph. The current Democratic soul searching is way too limited. Mr. Biden's age is a problem, but his age isn't the source of the party's dismal approval ratings. On the economy, the border, or on crime. It's not the cause of striking demographic shifts, which have been underway for years, that show that the working class, including minorities, are fleeing his party, the Lefty Party, the former Democrat Party. Progressive policies will be on the ballot this fall as much as any one person's name. If the party cared for its future, not just November 5, it'd be having that debate. But it's not interested in that debate. It's interested in sustaining the progressive socialist movement that Biden, as a sock puppet, has allowed them to carry forward. You see who the conversations are taking place among during this calamitous time. It's Obama. It's Clinton, the Clintons. It's George Clooney, God help us. It's all of these cast off who are not cast off at all. They are still very much in the game, in the middle of it, calling the shots, some might say, pulling the strings, the levers of power. You better believe it. Another observer of politics, a longtime observer, and one of our great conservatives of my lifetime, Newt Gingrich. He writes, what happens if they end up with Kamala Harris as president? If Vice President Harris is the Democratic nominee, it is likely she will lead the entire party into a disaster. Support for the rest of the Democratic ticket will collapse, meaning down ballot. We will relive the collapse of George McGovern's campaign in 1972 when he lost to a not very dynamic Republican named Richard Nixon, but he lost to him in a landslide in 72. Imagine every Democratic candidate being asked if they support the record and policies of Vice President Harris. Well, she doesn't have a record, and she can't articulate a policy. The fact is, writes Newt, President Biden's age has shielded Democrats from a deeper reality. Their own performance and policies are their greatest vulnerabilities. Yes, Harris wouldn't have her age as a shield. The focus would be on real policy failures and their real cost to everyday Americans. In other words, no benefit of the doubt for Commie Harris. You know, oh, she's old Commie. No, she's 59 years old. She seems to be, unfortunately, very, very, if nothing else, energetic. But so are high school cheerleaders, right? So anyway, Newt and Kimberly Strassel confirm my my thesis that we're not just seeing the decline of a man who won't get out of the way because he's too senile to understand what's going on. We're seeing the implosion of a party that is scared to death that without its sock puppet in the White House, it will have a hard time building on its power base because its voters are frittering away. Now, some of these corrupt polls will come out and say that Trump somehow only still has a 1-point advantage on Biden in a national poll. I think it was ABC News. But look at the totality of the polling in the swing states especially, and you will see a totally different story. All right, let's move on. In the halls of Congress this week, some really horrifying testimony by one Deborah White, who back in 2021 was working for the Department of Health and Human Services Office of Refugee Resettlement. Now, refugees these days are mostly illegal immigrants coming across our border in staggering numbers. All right. Her testimony before Congress on July 9, Chuck Grassley, Bill Cassidy of Louisiana, and Ron Johnson of Wisconsin came along with that of another whistleblower named Tara Rodas. But her findings and what she's telling them from her experiences back in 21 have led to a conclusion by the House Subcommittee on Border Security that the government at this moment in time cannot vouch for the whereabouts of 85,000 migrant children let into the country under Biden. 85,000 children. And some of them are not little kids. They're like teenage boys who are, combat ready in many cases. In 16% of the children's case files, one or more required sponsor safety checks that lacked any documentation indicating that the checks were conducted. So they're giving them away to these sponsors, so-called, and they have no idea how these kids are being treated once they're handed over. For 19% of children who were released to sponsors with pending FBI fingerprint or state child abuse and neglect registry checks, children's case files were never updated with the results. So again, they don't know what they don't know. In 35% of children's case files, sponsors submitted IDs contained legibility issues, like they were fake. Okay. In her testimony, this is heartbreaking. She related the horrors that migrant children witnessed even before they reached the border. Quote, typically they owed about $2,500, she said, when they arrived. Quote, they knew they were coming here to work and pay off that debt. Children. So labor trafficking was absolutely out of control. There were also cases where, children were sexually assaulted en route. The lawmakers expressed outrage not only about the Inspector General's statistical findings, but on the specific human stories the whistleblowers offered from their personal experience. Said Senator Johnson of Wisconsin, this isn't willful ignorance. This is not willful negligence. This is malevolent, allowing children, knowing full well that they have been sold and that people's eyes and organs are being harvested and that boys and girls are going to be raped and mutilated. See, this is the progressive left. This gets back to what I was saying. They don't care about the human toll of an open border. They literally do not care, could not care less. Meanwhile, your humble servant has discovered a bit of a loophole in what appears to be an otherwise rather benign program, which affects our state community colleges. You may not know this, but there is a federal provision by which our community colleges provide free English language training for people who need it. Now, the idea of it is that those who are not English language speakers who are in this country for whatever reason, no mention of their legality, but the idea is that they can pursue a better life once they can speak English more fluently. And of course, that is true to a certain degree. But what we have in this Adult Education and Family Literacy Act, which governs this, is the following. Here's who is eligible for this English language training free of charge at every community college in the state, including the one right here, Sandhills Community College in Pinehurst. Eligible individuals for AFLA, always an acronym, Adult Education and Family Literacy Programs are those who are, one, at least 16 years old, who are not enrolled in a secondary school. In other words, they're not in school where they could be learning English, that are deficient in basic skills, lacking a high school diploma, or who are English language learners for whom English is not a native language. However, when these people come to these locations to seek free English language courses, the requirement is only that they are asked to produce social security numbers or tax identification numbers, but they may not be denied services if they refuse to provide them. Now, who would refuse to provide such things? I don't know. An illegal immigrant? So as a practical matter, this creates a loophole through which undocumented illegal immigrants can seek English language acquisition instruction across the community college system. It is alarming that a taxpayer-funded community college is compelled to provide English language learning to illegal immigrants when federal statutes require that these programs can't even serve a student with a valid F1 visa. So if you're here on a visa from a foreign country, you can't get free English language training. But if you're here illegally, Queue up, line up, come on in. Free English language. No habla inglés, no problemo. So what we're setting up here is that we're potentially helping these illegal individuals become fluent English speakers, making it easier for them to assimilate, thereby further overwhelming public schools, our healthcare facilities, and inevitably they will diminish the presumption of safety and security in our communities. We're arming them with English language skills to make it easier for them to live their lives undocumented in our country. That's what we're essentially doing. Now, there are exceptions to what I'm saying. I'm sure that there are legally residing immigrants here who may wake up one day and say, you know what, I need to learn how to speak English better. And I have the documentation to prove that I should be here. That's fine. But I bet you that that's the exception. And I'm going to stay on top of this story, and I plan to bring it to the attention of my elected officials in the federal and state legislatures. Believe you me, I will take care of it. All right, let us move on. By the way, getting back to what I just said, last week there was a report out of Alabama that a illegal immigrant drunk behind the wheel of a car had been involved in an accident with his girlfriend and her 6-year-old child. I believe it was a daughter. And at the time, the report was that the daughter was in critical condition and had been hospitalized. Well, yesterday, I read the sad news that this 6-year-old daughter has died. So one more death chalked up to an illegal immigrant, either driving drunk or committing crimes, acting violently with a weapon or a handgun. In this case, the weapon was a vehicle. He was really intoxicated. And I guess the only good news is that now we'll have an excuse to get him the heck out of here and send him back where he came from. Let's hope they're taking that level of responsiveness in these kinds of cases. Please, Lord help us. All right, let's move on, folks. Here's another, I seem like I'm just coming at you like a fire hose with really disturbing things, but that's the world we live in. That is the broken culture we live in. And we're not going to get that back until we unseat all these lefties from the halls of power, the halls of academia, even the military to a large degree. Get this. This is a piece entitled The Normalization of Terrorism and Jew Hate by an author from the Gatestone Institute. All right. 9 months after the Iranian-orchestrated October 7 Hamas massacre of 1,200 mostly Israeli civilians, 116 hostages remain in Gaza, including at least 42 whom Israeli officials estimate were murdered after suffering unfathomable mental, physical, and sexual abuse. So we know we have these hostages, and we know we have the 1,200 person death toll from the October 7th event. However, what we're seeing is that there is a void of compassion. In fact, it's quite the opposite of compassion. What we're seeing now increasingly is this rising tide of anti-Semitism, bald-faced Jew hatred. Now, I won't read this to you word for word, but I suggest that you go to the Gatestone Institute website, gatestoneinstitute.org, and search for the July 10 piece by Robert Williams, and he will fill you in on what's going on. And I'll give you a more current example just reported this week by the Wall Street Journal. Here you go. This is an extension of this Jew hatred that he's talking about. Years of pro-Palestinian campaigning for a global boycott against Israel once found only limited support. But in the months since the war in Gaza began, support for the isolation of Israel has grown and widened well beyond Israel's war effort. The shift has the potential to alter Israeli careers, hurt businesses, and weigh on the economy of a country of 9 million people that depends on international cooperation and support for defense, commerce, and scientific research. The sciences had seen little impact from global boycott movements against Israel, even months into this war. But the work of people like Aaron Siegel was an example of how they were being left alone. He's a researcher. His work has nothing to do with Israel's military. His research collaborations include research on autism, Alzheimer's disease, water purification, and sustainable agriculture, which is something everybody needs. He writes, academic institutions develop technology for the security services that is later misused for human rights violations and provide training to soldiers and security. So this is the rationale. We need to stop these researchers because it will be misused to go after the bad guys, which in this case is Hamas terrorists, which, the anti-Israel people are championing. The committee, which is out of a university in Belgium, big deal. The committee also called for a Europe-wide suspension of Israel's participation in research and education programs, which often depend on European Union funding. If European partners heed the call, says Professor Siegel, quote, this would be a tremendous blow to our ability to do academic scientific research. So in other words, this one little ethics committee has decided, well, we can't let these Israelis who are very brilliant scientists and researchers develop new and improved programs and cures for diseases and agricultural solutions, because by golly, they might use those to take down these terrorists. We don't want that, do we? You can't make it up. That's the bottom line. You can't make it the heck up. I will leave you with one more recommended bit of reading. This one is also an institute. We have the Gladstone, and now we have the Brownstone Institute, which has an excellent website, which has covered, with great comprehensive regularity, all of the misdeeds of the pandemic creators, the virus producers, the creators of the dangerous mRNA serums, which have led to death and injuries among mostly healthy young adults. They've covered these stories extensively for 4 years. Led by Jeffrey A. Tucker, who has a piece in the Brownstone Institute on its website, July 11, The Pandemic Excuse for a Corporatist Coup. He finds that going back to 2007 under the George W. Bush administration, that quarantine of free American citizens became legally enforceable in plain sight for reasons that were never really explained. They created in 2007 essentially what has become the pandemic plan that we saw waged against us for the last 4 years. These plans once seemed abstract, writes Tucker, but in 2020 they became very real. Your rights were deleted. No more freedom even to have house guests. Remember? In those days, the rule was to enforce only 3 feet of distance rather than 6, neither of which had any basis in science. Indeed, the actual scientific literature, even at that time, 2007, so 13 years ago in 2020, 17 years ago now, the actual literature at that time recommended against any physical interventions designed to limit the spread of respiratory viruses. They were known not to work. The entire profession of public health accepted that. And then along came Anthony Fauci, the Wuhan man, and just trampled that common sense even within his own scientific community. Because remember, he was and is science. He is science. His book is entitled On Call. I think it ought to be called On Drugs, because that's how he conducted himself during the Wuhan lockdowns. Anyway, brownstoneinstitute.org, Jeffrey A. Tucker, July 11th. And then Gladstone Institute, Robert Williams, July 10th, GladstoneInstitute.org, the normalization of terrorism and Jew hate. So you've got a lot of reading to do. We need to stay vigilant and we need to remain informed. That is the best thing you can do as a patriot, other than registering to vote, registering others to vote diligently, and preparing as we near the 3-month countdown to early voting. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you as always for joining us here on the Liberty Podcast. It is 12 July 2024, and we'll see you right back here next time.